On behalf of IBM and NewSci, I want to welcome you to our presentation about how big data is being used in higher ed. I'm joined today by Tom Chaves with Lehigh University, who's going to speak a little later about his experience using big data and specifically NewSci's platform at his institution. Steve Marsh and Stuart Knight are representatives from IBM who focus on higher education. And after Tom speaks, he's going to talk to you about what other things that IBM can do with your institution. Um, my excitement about big data began about 4 years ago when I started to see the technology mature enough to be commercially applicable. That I knew that there'd been a frustration for years. I've certainly experienced myself the inability to really get at all the data. And back all the way to the 80s, I had a program that indexed my back then WordPerfect and WordStar documents, and then I had a relational database that dealt with all my demographic and numbers. But those were two separate things. And this concept that all data could come together really intrigued me, and I could see where our industry in particular could take advantage of it. So a couple of years ago in 2013, NewSci was formed to bring together domain expertise and proven technology to help our industry as it transitions from what is actually very old technology. And I'm not just talking about your legacy system, just the fundamental architecture is pretty long in the tooth, literally 60 years. We're going to transition to this new platform, and to do that, we're going to need to really understand how to apply it to our business problems instead of kind of getting caught up in the hype. So to start with, what is NewSci? What we are is insight as a service. So this is a big data platform that's focused on helping you grow and retain relationships. And the three sectors that we focus on are education, healthcare, and nonprofits. Now, that's in no small part because of my background as someone who's focused on wealth screening and CRM in my career, but it's also because these are three areas that relationships are at the core. If you think about it, for a school, if you can't begin a relationship, um, with someone becoming a student, and then if you can't keep that student, um, then you're not ever going to be able to monetize that student as an alumnus. And in healthcare, you start as a patient, you hope that they become donors. And of course, in nonprofits, at Netflix, where you can imagine analytics is at the core of their whole business. Now, what is big data? And it's important to understand what it is and what it's not, but also what would drive an institution towards it. The obvious one is volume. You have a lot of data, but this is a little bit of a trick question in our industry because a lot of times you think, oh, well, I've got to have petabytes and zettabytes of data. That's not true. Um, the key with data, although believe me, as you pull it together, you have more than you think. So don't just think about your main system, but you need to look at the other aspects. For instance, what's the velocity of that data? How often does it change? So is this data changing every day? In some institutions, as you start getting into things like think about students with swipe cards. Every day more and more data is coming in. As we get more mobile with our fundraisers, they could be feeding data in real time from the field. But variety is really what's driving higher ed to big data. Do you have a variety of types of data in a variety of places? And everyone's going to answer yes. You have data, you have numbers, currency, you have demographics, but you also have big blocks of text. And you have it all over your institution, and there's a lot of relevant data outside of your institution. And the final, these are, by the way, the 4 V's, is the, the veracity of the data. How much do you trust this data? And that's a really important aspect of big data. One of the reasons that people mistrust their data is because it's not all there. I mean, you've all been in meetings where you spend a lot of time getting a chart together. You put up the chart, and someone in the room says, that's not right because you didn't include X, or you didn't do this, or well, there's a story behind that. That's an unpaid pledge, for instance. Or maybe you're trying to predict what's going to happen, and you've included someone where they already know, oh, that person, there's no way they're going to support our institution. So only when we begin to pull all the information together can we start to bridge that trust gap. Now, having said that, when you pull it all together, when you first do that, you actually increase the mistrust, because now you're like, well, we've got to pull, maybe is that the same person in athletics that is sitting in our alumni system? So we've got to resolve that, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But the first step to building trust is to pull it all together. Now, there's some realities we're dealing with. We're not moving to big data because it's the cool thing to do, or it's the next thing, next big thing. They're just realities that are pushing us. One is that 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. I mean, we talked about, I can remember in the 90s us talks about the explosion of data and the sea of data. Well, we had no idea. That was just a trickle compared to what's going on today. 80% of that data is unstructured, meaning it's not fitting neatly into fields. It is out there in social media, it's in review sites, it's in notes fields, it's in documents, it's in videos. 20% is about the amount of data that we're leveraging today. So in other words, we're leveraging the structured data. And what's sad about this is actually optimistic. Most organizations are really only mining about 10% of their information. What this has led to is saying, 1 in 2 business leaders say they don't have access to the data they need. And what's really interesting is if you dig deeper, a lot of them think they have access to all the data, but in fact, when they're shown the facts, they don't. 83% of CIOs are saying that BI and analytics are part of their visionary plan. One of the things I put out there to our space is we've got to quit envisioning how we're going to do this. What that is, a vision is a nice way to delay it. We're in the middle of this. Data is already influencing outcomes without us being able to understand it or attempt to control it. We can't, stop these activities. The fact that someone puts a bad review out and then someone decides not to go to your school, that's a reality that's happening everywhere. And once you do implement this, we're already starting to see, more so in the corporate world, but we're starting to see the needle being moved, that the difference between the organizations that are adopting a big data framework and the ones that don't, there's actually a real competitive edge for those that do. In fact, companies like Cisco are talking about companies that don't get on this bandwagon. 10 years from now, we'll probably not be here. Now, you're going to hear some things about unstructured data, but one of the things I want to do today is make this relevant to you as opposed to 30,000 feet. Think about the donor-generated text. Think about verbatims in a survey. So not not the on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did you love your school? Choose one of these 5 choices. It's where you ask open-ended questions. How did you feel about your experience at the school? Think about social media. Can't get more unstructured than that. Class notes. And by the way, I'm seeing more and more technologies to grab this kind of survey data. Just saw a product recently from a company called Mino that you basically build a book for each class reunion year where people put in little novellas about their experience and about their lives. Think about call center reports, trip reports, just all those notes. And I know there's a gap. We always, one of the jokes is a trip report is, good visit, nice house. But part of the reason that was done was one, it's just difficult. Well, that's getting easier as we have iPads and smartphones. It's easier to get us that data. But the other reason I think some people have not filled these out is what was done with it. They just felt like it was put in kind of that vault of the legacy system, and it might be interesting for them to read or someone in the future, but nothing was done with it. Well, now we can do something with that information. Then you think about all the news and publications, biographical data, all the websites. So I was talking about things like review sites. And then the internal data like research profiles, all like think about the class notes. Schools are now have a digital version of all their alumni magazines. Well, now you can use this technology to mine it. You can also get at your mission data. And one of the exciting ways for this to be used is to actually match people to your projects and programs. So you consume all the data about your projects and programs and then actually match it based on interest. So to understand kind of where we've been and where we're going, a little bit of history here. The tabulating system era, which I found out not too long ago my grandmother was part of in World War II, that was started in 1900. The program you're using today, if that's Banner, Razor's Edge, Advance, Salesforce, is really based on 1950s technology. And this is the idea of rows and columns, so fields. The cognitive era, which is what we've entered, is where suddenly machines, there's enough processing power, storage is cheap enough, and we can visualize the data that now we can begin to take in not only all that structured data, but unfielded, unstructured information. Now, big data actually sits right in between those. Big data is what's powering the cognitive era. But without cognitive computing, the ability to understand natural language and take data in its natural form, we really wouldn't be able to do a lot with cognitive with all the data we're collecting. So to understand how the platform works, most of you hopefully know what a relational database is. This is just standard inside of all your systems. You've got tables, you have fields, you have IDs that link the tables. And so as long as you play by the rules, where you put David Miller Lawson in the first, middle, and last name fields, we're all good. In the big data world, we take all those tables, and you think of like a razor's edge, there might be close to 1,000 tables behind the scenes. And we take all of that and flatten it down to very few tables. And that's done on something called Hadoop. And think of Hadoop, you'll hear terms like NoSQL. This is the modern way that you house data. Now, another word to understand is something called MapReduce. So, okay, great, you have all this data. How did you actually reduce it? Well, this is a schematic to give you an idea. Imagine that something's coming in, you've got 3 inputs, and each of the 3 have contained these words. Well, what it does is it breaks it out so it knows, okay, here are 3 components. It then counts at the word level. so the data level, how many there are, with the ultimate goal, with the word bare, knowing there are two places where that is. So if you think about Google, it's the only way a Google could work. And by the way, Google and Yahoo created all this because relational databases, you can't query. The only way you can do it is as you start to type words, it's actually going to one place to look for that word and saying, okay, instead of a billion places, there are only a million places for that word. And now when I put in my next word, well, now I'm down to 100,000 places and so on. So it rapidly gets at the data. So it's indexing the information from all of your databases. Now, in the traditional approach to data, here's how it would work. Business would come to you and say, here's what I need an answer to. In many ways, they would start with an answer. I need to see all our pledge payments from last year, or let's say total giving. And I want you to include soft credits or not. Then IT would build the functionality to recreate that answer. Then business executes it. At some point, they might say, I'd like it a little different. The new requirements would go back in. So this worked well with the structured data. But in the big data world, we start out by saying, what are all the available data sources? So we think much broader, not just your legacy system. Where is all the data at our institution and what relevant outside data? And then we put it on a platform. And that's where the new size platform powered by the IBM technology sits. Then the business user asks questions, open-ended questions. Thank goodness someone asked the open-ended question, why are some hurricane seasons more severe than others? That then allowed with the open-ended question, rather than starting with an hypothesis, like for instance, well, it must have something to do with weather conditions and ocean conditions in the Atlantic. By asking an open-ended question, it allowed temperatures in the Pacific, which is actually, and El Nino, La Nina effect. Then once we gain an insight like that, that's when we operationalize it. So think of big data as a discovery platform, not a reporting platform or a query platform. And then you're starting to get closer to its real value. Now, what's the problem we're addressing? So this is a typical university. This is actually only looking at advancement. What's been funny is I've shared this with different not only schools, but nonprofits. When I throw this up, everyone goes, oh, that looks like ours. So the problem is universal. So don't feel like you've created some nightmare. Everybody has this same nightmare. And what it grew out of was we purchased all these specialized applications to solve particular problems. So we have a call center software, we have donor management software, we have ticketing software, we have HR software, and each one of those do their magic. But for us to pull that all together, well, those are all different vendors. Now, one solution that was put forward was, what if you did buy everything from one vendor? Then it would magically, I call this kind of the Microsoft Office approach, that it would all magically work. Well, there were two problems. One, it turned out even when you bought from one vendor, they really were separate modules. It wasn't as seamlessly integrated as advertised. But the other thing that happened was inevitably there were applications outside of that vendor's world. Somebody, let's say it's student information or ticketing or social media or fundraising, would say, I don't like that the module for me. I'm going to go buy some other vendor. And now we were back in that same problem. And this also didn't even account for the explosion of data outside of your control, such as social media. So what our solution is is to turn all that into its data. So rather than try to change all the applications and make you purchase everything from one vendor, what we'll do is take a copy of all that data and put it onto what we call our findability platform. Now, technically, how does this work? We actually connect through your firewall, and we grab either with APIs, we can do it with web services, we can grab data files, any kind, as long as it's digital, we can get to that information. We also can connect out to social media or to other relevant external data. That all comes onto our platform. Now, what we've done is baked into this all of the next necessary technology and then added our own algorithms to be able to create, for instance, a retention system for you. The 360, I'll show you an example, a real 360 view of someone's involvement with you, analytics, social media, and we also can connect this into Watson. So the Jeopardy Watson, as well as some of you may have seen Watson Analytics, which uses some elements, natural language processing, but it's actually not the cognitive Watson. That's more of a competitor to like Tableau. But the other thing you do is once you have it all this data, don't think that it's a closed box system. In fact, I think one of the real advantages of going down this path is you can create transparent models. So we can send all the data out via REST API so that you can consume everything we find. So it's not like a news size score. So we can help you build a score, we can build it from ground up, or we can use your scores, but any parts of it we always make available, because I just think we've moved beyond these cookie cutter scores. I think we've got, data's too dynamic. Frankly, each of your institutions, while there may be a lot of similarities, there's also a lot of uniqueness. Now, the other thing that this introduces is the big data version of Excel called Big Sheets and the big data version of SQL, which is Big SQL. So for those that have the technical skill on staff, you again are able to actually do even more with the information. But you also can take this data and put it into Cognos or any systems that you have out there that consume data, the advisors of the world, Tableau, in Watson Analytics, all of that this can consume from our platform. Now, I know this is higher ed focus, but I wanted to show you something we're doing with Mercy Health. This is one of the top 15 health systems in the country out of Ohio. We've actually taken 9 instances of Razor's Edge plus Financial Edge and a number of their outside vendors like Harris Connect, that's like their Ruffalo Cody, there's call center, well screening, so they use a well screening company, but then they also have some other systems like this Epic, which has some patient related, HIPAA compliant kind of data, but also we're taking in patient satisfaction surveys. And one reason I show this is how Mercy shows NewsSci to its staffs. In other words, we didn't create this. And I think this really illustrates the power that you can have a big data platform and still have all these other pieces functioning. So how does this concept of insight reservoir really work? Well, first off, and you'll hear a term out there called data lake. I don't like data lake because a lake is just too open-ended. And what a reservoir is, it's your reservoir. You're not putting your data in some common area. You have your own instance of all of this. And that's important for 2 reasons. One, just security and governance. But the other reason is it really does become yours over time. It learns about your institution. So this is not like a, out of the box, it's a little more generic, but over time it becomes yours. But imagine in the reservoir being able to put athletics, the alumni association, the parents, if you have an advocacy group, if you do have a med school or a medical center, obviously all your social media. But what if you buy outside data like from Axiom? You could just buy that and put it in the reservoir. Or you've bought these outside apps like Quadrangle and Evernote. We're not going to not buy these applications. In fact, we're going to buy more. But once it's all in here, we can start to do, first off, information governance. Some people get afraid of big data. And what I say to them is, if you're afraid of what big data could do, then you should be terrified of why you're afraid. Because if pulling all your data together somehow creates some scary environment, well, let's find out what's scaring you. Is there data, for instance, you shouldn't be collecting? Is there data that is poor quality? Is there data that should not be accessed by people who right now can access it? Well, the only way we can begin to govern our data is if we pull it all together. And in fact, more and more, my conversations are actually kind of in that C-suite. I've got a meeting in a couple of weeks with a president of a university. And information governance is front and center for why he's looking at big data. And then that's quickly followed by all the insights that he can gain. But it actually starts here. Now, the other thing that this does is entity resolution. We have people in our databases with all kinds of variations of names and also potentially at different points in their life. So the ability to pull all that together and figure out, okay, these 3 Jane Does are the same people, they're not these others, and then begin to build a true record. I think about, like, for my wife, she gets so many versions of her name from the different schools because she actually has 3 higher education degrees. And, they've got 3 different versions. And even within those, you'd have the Alumni Association send her one type versus the school, the athletics. Now, the other thing is, once we've pulled all this together, we can start looking at the total communications that we've sent. Imagine being able to know all the visits by everyone, every touch point, every event, all the emails, all the calls across an institution. And of course, when you first look at this, it's going to be scary because what you're going to realize is you're over communicating. No wonder they didn't open that really important email because it was the 51st email they got. But the first thing we have to do is get control of our communications and know what we're doing holistically instead of at a silo. And then another thing you're able to do is correlate it back, like in this case, current year giving, gift since a certain time, but whatever you want to correlate it to, it's very easy. So that's another hallmark of big data. It's very easy to mix and match. I mean, you could look at, how does giving relate to athletic attendance, for instance? Also, you can do sentiment analysis. Now, some of you may have played with this, and there is pushback about sentiment analysis because they're like, well, it's not perfect. Well, first off, no data is perfect. We've got to get out of that. We're not in it. We're in an incredibly imperfect world today because we have an incomplete picture that's not 100% accurate. What we're advocating is a complete digital picture, knowing we'll still have inaccuracies, but being able to close that field of insight substantially is going to be worth everything. So let's don't, it reminds me of well screening in the early days when I'd bring back, 1,000 great new prospects and somebody in the room, but you didn't find, X. And I'm like, really, what should we focus on? What you already knew or the new information I brought? But here's the key to sentiment analysis. It has to be in context. It needs to be able to tell you, was that sentiment when they were talking about Lehigh? Or was it maybe negative sentiment because something bad happened in their life? They lost a loved one, just something, and that is negative, but it's not negative about you. So being able to do the text analytics in combination with sentiment analysis is critical. You also can extract what are called entities. So it actually is smart enough to know the difference between a city and state and a sport and a person. And also you can train it over time if there's certain words like, I live in Tallahassee, so the Knowles, right? So that means something with the sports team. Or you'll have, UCF has the Knights. So you need to teach it to understand what that is. But once you do that, then you're set. Now, another thing that it's able to do is go through text. This is actually from call center reports, and figure out what are the dominant reasons somebody didn't give. And what's interesting with the insights you get here, here with the fraternity sororities kicked off, we actually discovered that most of those were not donors. So it was just one more reason not to give. Now, social media, and Tom can share a little more about this in a minute. When we started with Lehigh, we actually were only allowed into a few of their social media accounts, and because other people felt like they owned them. But as we began to show what we could glean out of this, more and more have come in, and I think we're up to close to 40 today. Now, when you look at the social conversations, you now can start to look for people. Are they talking about you? What are their passions and interests? And then when we get that information, we're actually able to match that to your projects and programs. The other thing is, by the way, if you ever want to convince somebody that Twitter's worth something, then you should look at the total giving of Twitter, your Twitter followers. And you're going to be surprised at some of the people and some of the money that is out there. Now, again, Tom will go a little more into this, but I wanted to give you some context. One of their projects is a great thing called Mountaintop. This is a experiential learning center, and they wanted to find prospects. Well, we used that interest data to match up to this project. And that's been, what excited me was the number of people who were now could be prospects that weren't making it through the traditional approaches to prospect identification, which looked a little too much on what degree did you have and past giving. Now, when we pull all this data together, it's all searchable. So what this is just showing are interest areas and the number of people. So that's another thing. I mean, if you're just creating all this data, but there's no way to get at it, that's going to be frustrating. So we make all this data very consumable, so it's easy for you to search. Again, remember, we also can just throw the data out to you, and then you can use whatever systems you have for manipulating information. We also can build, as I mentioned, scores, personas. In fact, one of the new things that we're announcing is using Watson's personality insights. And we're actually able to take authored content and build personality profiles. But these scores are a combination, some that Lehigh had built themselves that we enhanced, some that were just straight out theirs, but then others we built from the ground up. So what's the payoff? Well, you start to get a true 360. Everybody talks about a 360, but the reality of that 360 is what you end up with is mostly demographic and transaction data. So we're doing a decent job of warehousing that kind of data. So you're trying to get all the different transactions and demographics. What we're leaving behind, though, is behavioral and interaction data. And what we're saying is without that, you don't really have a 360. You have a deeper 180. So the only way to look at someone in their totality, I'll give you an example here in town. I have a friend who's a giver to FSU, but her son's entering as a freshman this year, and he was denied housing. Well, she's reconsidering whether or not she's going to give this year. Well, the only way FSU is going to know about that is if they had their housing information in the same place as their donor information to be able to connect those dots. So you're going to have some frustrated major gift officers who aren't going to know until finally they get to her, and then they're going to get an earful. So how does this work if you're interested in moving forward with the platform? First off, we do a proof of concept, because one thing everyone thinks is, well, okay, it worked with Lehigh or it worked with Mercy, but will it work with me? So we do a quick proof of concept to let you see we really can make sense of your data. We've worked with Razor's Edge, Banner, Blackbaud CRM, Salesforce, and then a lot of things in between. The whole process, and this is, a lot of people, they can't believe it, is literally a matter of a few months. This is not an 18-month program because there's no data mapping. Literally, we get the data, index it. You're much more in a editing role. What are the returns that you're going to see? Well, first is that cross-organizational, cross-institutional view. We believe we can move the relationship retention needle because we can help you better understand current interest and passions and help you match those up to your projects and programs. Understanding all those apps you're buying, we're going to free up that data to be mixed in with your other data and then presented out to your end users in whatever is their preferred, like Salesforce, or Tom will talk about his program uses Argos. Also, information governance, as I mentioned earlier, that's where we're going to get true data quality. That's where we're going to get real security and access control. And then the other thing is that this is going to be running 24/7, 365. So with that, I want to turn it over to Tom.
So I want to share where we are at Lehigh. We're just about almost a year into our working with the new site platform, and very excited about where we come, and probably more excited about the potential. As David highlighted, there's really is an unlimited capability of how to really use the information, and that's a fortunate thing, but it's also a challenge. Quite honest with you, is how do you really? It's easy to get at this information with this platform, but how do you really then use it and put it into action and make sure you're understanding what it means? Because the whole discovery piece that David talked about is powerful, and so how do you manage that power is really what we're looking to do. So if we go to the next slide, David, I'll focus on. So this just says we're about a year into it at this point. So let's move to the next slide. And to David's point about the implementation, we signed with them on July 23rd. We had all the data, once we talked with our IT folks and firewalls and security and encryption and all that, it was more discussions than anything. But David and Newsci had the data from, we used Banner as our backend. Within, I think by the end of September, early October, they had all the data and started to, if you will, show us, what the data is telling us. So it really was a quick implementation in terms of getting at this data through the platform. The time was really more of our internal discussions and making sure all of our policies were being followed. But here are the three key areas that we saw the value as we analyzed the use of the big data platform, and it's exactly what David talked about. Is we have multiple systems. We have a chart just like the one he showed, and so we wanted to start to bring that data. We've built a lot of good relationships here at Lehigh over the last number of years in terms of the value of sharing information, but our approach has been more old school, if you will. Give us spreadsheets and we'll find a place to put it, and try to do some data entity or entity resolution and all that kind of stuff. Very, very tedious. And so this was just a great way to open that up and make it more streamlined. And our first partners have been in our athletics area with our ticketing and merchandise systems, as well as the camp data that they have, and then sync that up with all of our donor information. So we're making some good progress there on bringing that information in. And then social media is probably the area where we saw the first and earliest wins. Is how we're tapping into social media. which is a combination of people, liking and commenting on our social media sites, as well as linking into their social media sites when we've done that entity resolution, and finding out the interests of people, and showing our gift officers, what people's interests are based on their social media information. And as David mentioned, we are using our visualization tool, which currently is Argos, to show this information to our gift officers so that they didn't have to learn another platform. And it was an opportunity for us to get an early win with this platform, so that we can, through Newside's API, we were able to get that data rather quickly and just display it in the same interface that they had in terms of their social media information, who they're being influenced by, who they are influencing. All that was quickly identified and made available. So we're using that. I think we had that running by November, and so our gift officers have been using that rather efficiently in their interactions with people. But just being able to get all that social media information and combining it with all the information we know to enhance our relationship about what we know about them and how we can target them for appropriate philanthropic purposes has been great. Text mining, we're still really early on in that. We've done some sampling of it just to see how it works, but to David's point earlier, trying to understand how to put it into the right context, so that when it is negative, understanding is that negative about Lehigh versus not, and so we're still working with that. We're really early on. We really haven't seen many wins with that yet. We're just getting comfortable with what this looks like as we start to understand it. So let's move on. So this is just a little bit what I mentioned on the social media awareness and the disparate systems. We're also doing our Arts Center as well for disparate systems. We've been good partners with them, and so they're opening up their system as well to allow us to see who's attending the arts programs and shows on campus. So let's move forward here. So here's where we're currently at in terms of what's next, what we're looking at. We have purchased an app called Quadrangle, which allows our alums to do career networking, as well as for us to push information from our websites to them, and we'll be able to process all that information and understand what people are doing, feed that into the Newside platform rather seamlessly, and then learn from that as well and compile that with all the other information to understand more about what's of interest to people. We've been working with our academic partners in the colleges and the faculty on how they can take advantage of having access to all this information. We've had one faculty member here at Lehigh who spent a sabbatical at Facebook, and they do this kind of stuff all the time. So he's very anxious to see how to now apply some of that to Lehigh's scenario and getting access to data. So we're excited about that. Working with the Office of Institutional Research, Enrollment Management, we're excited. Our provost is excited about this kind of big data access, and we've got a project approved to look at enrollment data to support some of the retention questions that we have, and are we attracting the right students, and as the demographics of students change, how does that look in terms of retention and so on. So we're excited there. The Office of Economic Engagement is our corporate and foundation area at Lehigh, but it's really, if you will, CRM for companies, how we as Lehigh University interact with our economic partners to maximize our relationship with them, and talk about a set of systems across campus that are disparate. There's research systems, there's faculty have their own little systems, we have our own donor systems, and so looking to bring all that data together to better understand our relationships with our economic partners is a great opportunity for this platform, and we've had some great conversations around how to move forward there, so we're excited about that. And that last bullet point there is really, a key thing that we're looking at is how, again, as I mentioned earlier, how to really make best use of this information, and the data scientist's role in all this. So as this information becomes more easily available, how do you make sense of it? How do you apply it? And needing some of those data scientist skills that to apply in order to really get the maximum value. And so we're looking at how to complement those skills that we have on staff with some more heavy-duty data scientists, using faculty, using some students, working with the Newside team as well in order to make the most sense of all this information. And I think that might
Thank you,
be
Tom.
it. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and we are going to keep this open. I'll unmute in just a moment for any questions there might be, and also feel free to reach out to Tom directly. Right now, I want to turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit about IBM and what they do in the higher ed space. Steve?
Sure, just a quick minute. My name is Steve Marsh. I'm one of the IBM information reps in Maryland and Virginia. Stuart Knight is also on the phone. Just a quick second on some of the solutions that IBM has for higher ed. So at a high level, the analytics for higher education, we focus on a few key strategies. From creation to retirement, we help manage the life cycle of your student, your alumni, the university data. We help you identify, access, and integrate your data across the enterprise. Cleanse the data, standardize it, match it. So imagine a 360-degree view of the student as they move from freshman, or even as they move from an applicant through to an alumni. So once the data is cleansed, how do we trust the data? Well, information governance has been a big topic as of late in higher education, and we're a leader in this space, helping lines of business interact with IT by bridging the gap through defining their data and their assets. So we also work with data security. Who can see what? Does the registrar's office need to see health records, or does the infirmary need to access social security numbers, that kind of thing? We assist in making sure your data is secure and compliant. There have been a few large universities that were hacked this past year, one locally. We help prevent that. So once the data is cleansed, trusted, and secure and ready for analysis, we offer a wide variety of ways to store that data in fast, reliable warehouse solutions, both on appliances or in the cloud, and a variety of visual and analytics tools such as Watson as a way to report and analyze the data once it's correct. Most of the schools are starting to dip their toes into cloud and hybrid cloud strategies, so we're leading that space and happy to assist in those discussions. And then when you're done with the data, how do you retire it, how do you archive it, make sure it's secure? We help in that process as well. So in closing, our goal is to help you better manage, understand, and protect your data, provide fast, reliable, and actionable insight to that data. So David, I think we'll just open it up for Q&A, don't you think?
That would be great. Thanks, Steve. And so with NewSci, you can get to us about implementation of the core big data platform, and then with Steve, some of these larger issues we either will work together or you can do things independently. That issue about the cloud and on-premise, that's important. Most people are moving to the cloud. We actually host on IBM SoftLayer, but we actually can put our platform on-premise if you don't want the data off-site. So with that, I am going to unmute everybody. I did it, and if there are any questions. And the good news is there are no dogs barking, so this is good. So any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Thank you. What institution are you with?
Oh, yeah. Hi. This is Diane Horvath. I'm a consultant in this space in Toronto, Canada, and have met you, Dave, and
Yep.
certainly worked with Tom a lot before through ASP.
So I'm going to look it up. I'll try it later.
And my question is, I just have a couple of questions, but I'll get this going with. When you're building the reservoir, does everybody have to jump in at once, or can you just keep adding different systems? Because Tommy talked about your partners being athletics in the Arts Center, and I'm just wondering if this can be sort of evolutionary in building that reservoir. Is it sort of the Big Bang Theory and everybody's got to jump in at once?
No, it's evolutionary. I suppose one day they might all jump in, but typically you're going to take either, let's say, advancement or admissions or student will come in first, and then it will start to expand from there. We are having some success with institutional research because they have a unique position in a university to. They already have the rights to look across everything. So if you can get them as an ally, it could give you the opportunity to go a little bigger. But no, it's definitely evolutionary. So you know what drives the cost? It's the amount of data and the number of connections, right? The number of connections has more to do with implementation than it does with driving the overall cost. But it's really a data-driven piece. So if, so in other words, like, oh, well, let's add one more, and that's your entire student information system. That's different than, let's say, we want to add one more, and it's your well screening data.
I see. Okay. Great.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I just have a follow-on to that then. I think that it was Stuart that talked about IBM's services, of course, towards cleansing the data. And I wanted to ask you, Dave, and over to Tom as well for the experience at Lehigh. Do you have to cleanse the data before it goes into this data reservoir, or do you just sort of trust it as it is, and then you're always cleansing as you go? And I wonder what the experience was at Lehigh, how you approach that, Tom.
Yeah. Actually, no cleansing before. It really was just opening up. We had some, email conversations about just explaining some of the concepts and some of the rules, if you will, our business rules, so that the interpretation of the data was appropriate, but no cleansing needed to occur. I will say, some things came out that helped us clean up our data on the back end as a side effect, but in terms of really taking advantage of the platform, there was no cleansing needed.
I mean, one thing that you do, it's a benefit, but it's initially a challenge. That's why I like the if you think about a reservoir, that picture, it allows everything to fall into it. It's just you control the environment. So you are going to discover problems. But once you discover them, you fix them on your end, not in the reservoir. And then when the reservoir connects again, it's all fixed. So we grew up in a garbage in, garbage out. In this world, you throw all your digital garbage, if you will, all your digital data in, and then that's where you make sense of it. And over time, it actually increases the the quality. So, any other questions?
Hi, David. My name's Dana Stowe. I actually am also connected through Tom, and I worked in Lehigh University's admissions office, but I'm a consultant now. But I'm naturally curious to see if you've done this. You mentioned it before, but have you started with an admissions office with your data project yet?
Not yet, but we are in very active conversations with a couple of universities because they see like our personality insights, being able to look at essays, for instance, and also the matching of prospective students to scholarship opportunities.
Okay.
Is another one. So we're very much, we're looking for that. I mean, we started in advancement. I mean, to be fair, look, I've 30 years of selling to advancement, right? So I have a bias that way. But also, the ROI is always a little easier there, right?
Right.
But admissions, I think, could have a huge upside with this, because we could also take a lot of demographic data to look at like market penetration. Since you have that experience, how you're not really, even though you take anyone at Lehigh, you have geographic concentrations. So the idea that we could take all that data from those concentrations and compare your applicant pool and let you know your penetration. So yeah, we're actively looking for places there. And then on the student side, it's student success / retention. And then a last one I'll throw out there, which is a hybrid between, really, in a way, all of them, is looking at student success out in the world. So the idea that we would go out there in mine and be able to come back and say, forget about like, I mean, you know, obviously we care about how much income they make, that kind of thing, but what's the impact your students are having in the world? And then you could use that data to help make people want to go to your school, stay in your school, and of course ultimately give.
Right, right. Great stuff. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, any other questions? We're coming up on 2 o'clock. I appreciate your time. I do want to give a shout out right now to James Madison University, who's on this call, and that slide you saw earlier was actually their systems. So I want to assure you, in case any of you are thinking like, wow, what a mess. As I said, everywhere I go, everyone says it's their system. So thank you, Chris and team, for providing me that beautiful look at chaos. Anyway, thanks everybody. We will let you know. Hopefully technology will work on the GoToMeeting recording, and we'll let you know when we've got that link ready, and we will share it. Please get in touch about a proof of concept, or even just to talk about where you think your institution is. We know that we're at a period where, you know, we've got early adopters. I thank the people like Tom and Mercy, and we just started working with some United Ways and Multicare. But this is just like well screening in the beginning. Not everybody did it. There's going to be a build here. And so we're very interested in working with people to, even if it's a fairly small project, to just get the market to understand the value. Because once they see the payoff, the investment, just like with well screening, you very quickly go, wow, you know, why didn't we do it sooner? That actually the cost of not solving the problem far exceeds the cost of solving it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks, Tom, Steve, Stuart.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Do anything else except like, or